As promised, here is a video on having autism and beginning to implement boundaries. People with autism can often struggle with creating and showing up and placing boundaries, and often it can derive from the people pleasing that I've also made a video on, so please go and watch that if you haven't already watched it. But I wanted to give you an analogy. I know we all know this to be a ball. It is a ball. However, imagine just for a moment that the autistic person says, this is a ball. And somebody comes along and says, that's not a ball, that's a pen. And they're like, what? Oh, it's not, it's a ball. And then somebody else comes along and goes, don't be so stupid, it's a pen. And then they basically get ganged up on with a bunch of people telling them that their version of reality is not real, it's not true, and it's invalid and it's challenged. And I know that's a really silly example and a silly kind of analogy, but autistic people often go through life where their experience of life is invalidated and often challenged, which pushes them into, if I want to not feel rejected, I don't want to feel abandoned, I don't want to feel judged, I don't want to feel a lack of acceptance, what can I do? And the result of this often is people pleasing, like I went on to say before, but also the kind of knock-on domino of that is that we then begin to fail to show up for ourselves. Ultimately, we end up not being able to set boundaries. And I thought that boundaries is quite a universal thing. I don't think that it's just exclusively a struggle that autistic people struggle with. However, I do think that it is something that they do often struggle with. So I wanted to make a video directly about that. So, when should I make a boundary? It seems like a simple question, but it's one of those things that if you have a level of not understanding self or being used to minimizing or pushing away aspects of yourself, it might not have a really obvious answer. So I wrote down a couple of examples of questions that you could ask yourself that would be a really good place to start as to whether you should maybe create space between doing what you instinctively do, which would be the maybe minimizing your own needs, not setting the boundary and not showing up for yourself, and create enough space where you get to think about what it is that you want to do and how you want to approach this. So the first thing is that, is this something that's I'm going to have to recover from that doesn't hold a greater purpose? The reason why I think this is important is because sometimes, especially if we're a people pleaser, we're not going to intrinsically feel comfortable in making a different move, but the discomfort isn't the problem. And sometimes we might assume that that's a problem, but it's not. It's actually what is the greater purpose of doing this. And sometimes we have to consider that there's two people or multiple people to include in outcomes, include in the greater purpose, and also including self. And also, is this outside of my skill set, or is this outside of my capacity? Example would be, if I had had a really long day at work, which actually today I have, and I don't have that much left in the tank, I would say I'm on about 30 or 40, and for the things that I have set out for the rest of today, I have enough. I have enough to get me through today. However, if somebody wanted to spring on a social event onto my calendar, onto my plate today, last minute, I know for a fact that I'm going to be costing myself in the long run, and that I'm going to feel some level of that actually sits outside of what capacity I've got left today. I could do it, but maybe on a different day would be my response. But I would be asking myself, do I have enough in my tank? Do I have enough in my capacity and social battery to be able to meet that demand today? And if I don't, that's okay to admit that and show up for myself, which I previously would not have done. The third thing I would ask myself, is this going to make me resentful in the future and actually cause me further difficulties? Example would be that if I showed up for everybody all of the time, which I know so many of us do, and we are meeting their needs permanently, and it's almost an expectation at this point, and minimizing my own, but also feeling like nobody else sees me, nobody else is taking care of me, then guess what? I'm going to at some point get resentful of that, because I'm caring while nobody's feeling like they're caring for me. I've later come to learn that people care in the way that you tell them to care, in the way that you ask them to care, in the way that you show it's important for you to be shown up for. And again, that was just a discovery that I made in later age. So another one would be, is this going to cause me any long-term damage that is not just uncomfortable in the moment? So, like I said a little bit earlier, if I'm a prolific people pleaser, if I say no, guess what? That's going to make me uncomfortable in this moment. But the long-term benefits of saying no far outweigh the discomfort of the moment, and that is a question to consider. And the other one, and again, maybe if I haven't thought of some of the questions that are really good ones to ask yourself, please do put them in the comment section below. But the other one that I would ask myself is, am I trying to make somebody comfortable and happy at the expense of making myself uncomfortable and unhappy? This is self-explanatory. It's a really good one to be able to just ask yourself, write it in the notes on your phone, rehearse it in your mind, and then ask yourself in that moment, am I just trying to make them feel more comfortable? Am I just trying to make them happy? Am I just trying to please them in some way, whilst deliberately doing the opposite thing for myself? Because the thing is that two people can be considered at once, and that's really healthy. It's okay to consider self and consider them, but to only consider them is unhealthy, in the same way that it would be unhealthy to only consider yourself, unless it's just an action that impacts you solely. So you might ask me, Jade, that's all good and well. Now I have the awareness, now I know when I might need to set a boundary. How do I go about setting a boundary? Firstly, I think you have to accept that it is going to be uncomfortable. But anybody that I have helped set up boundaries in their life, I can promise you, not one of them regrets it, and not one of them goes back to being the prolific people pleaser that they once was. Remember, people pleasing is a fear response. It's not a love response. And I think that because it gets wrapped up in our sense of identity, that it makes us a good person, and it's because we love somebody dearly, we assume that it's a place of love. It's not, it's a place of fear. It's saying that if I show up in equal measure to how I'm holding you, will I be seen? Will I be met? Will I be accepted? Or will I be rejected? So, how to set a boundary? The first thing is that you have to make a statement on what you're going to do. So remember, and I can't stress this enough, a boundary is for you. It is not a manipulation tactic. It is not a threat. It is not a way to control somebody else's behaviour, because you will not be able to do that. So just understand that from the get-go. However, it is I would hold a statement that you are going to fundamentally say, and you are not going to deviate from, and it is something that you are going to do for yourself. So that might be, if somebody is being rude to me, I can say, do you know what? I'm not partaking in this conversation anymore. I'm going to take myself away. I'm going to go for a walk, or do you know what? I'm going to go into another room, or whatever it is, until I feel in a place where we can reconnect again and be respectful to one another. And then I think that we have to couple the statement with an action, which would be the going into a different room, making sure that whatever the action is, it mirrors that you're creating some level of distance and some level of consequence, not for them to suffer, but because you are not willing to put up with that behaviour anymore. You can love somebody dearly, but you can also understand that actually that behaviour is having an impact on you, and that you don't have to suffer because of that. I should probably mention at this point, the only time that I do not suggest a boundary to be enforced is if you genuinely believe enforcing the boundary is going to cause you some physical harm. In this case, seek help. Boundaries are still absolutely necessary, but the right precautions and the right safety measures need to be in place for you to be able to do that. Please do not put yourself in danger. However, back to it. Also, like I say, accommodate with an action. And then the other thing to kind of make sure that the boundary is firm and holds weight is to make sure that whatever it is that you set up, you do it consistently without deviating it, without changing it. So the statement is the same. The level of the emotional input you create when you are saying it is steady and is not of a place of being triggered or activated, which I know is hard. However, I think that we know that adding fire to fire creates more fire. So it is the kind of creating a sense of settlement inside of you, which is the reason why you're creating the distance in the first place, so that you can do that and being consistent with it. So to wrap that up in a nice little bow, it would be a clear, crystal clear statement of what you're going to do, because you aren't partaking in this anymore, or because you can't do said task or do said thing or partake in whatever it is, whatever the boundary might be. You'd be clear on the consequence of what you are going to be doing because of what is happening and what action you said that you're going to be taking. And I would make sure that I deliver it the same way every time. I think the other thing to kind of note here is that you're going to have pushback, especially if you are not used to delivering it like this, and especially if the other person is not used to receiving it like this. It's not going to be comfortable. It's going to cause some cognitive dissonance. It's going to cause some confusion. It's going to cause some upset. Don't let that be the reason that you stop. If you deliver it consistently, in the same tone, in the same place, in the same statement, in the same deliverance, in the same outcomes every time, a little bit like, and I know this is going to sound very manipulative, but I'll explain to you why it's not. In the same way that we train a dog or we help a child learn a new skill, it's going to take repetition, but eventually they will learn. And the reason it's not manipulative is because it is not you trying to control them or their behaviour. You're just saying, this is to do with me, and this is to do with what I will tolerate and what I want for myself and what future outcomes I want for me. And this is no longer working for me. I don't like to be spoken to like that. I don't like people to expect something of me when they expect me to do it for free, or they don't consider how this has affected me. Or it could be that I don't want to be touched and you keep touching me, and I maybe haven't made that clear, but I'm going to make it clear today, and I'm going to do it respectfully. I think that that's another thing that we should add to another layer of the bow of the kind of the deliverance, is that the more respectful we are, the more that somebody ultimately cannot come back at us. So if I said, you know what, I appreciate that maybe you like to be, hugged and things like that, and I get it. I get it. I know that many people do, but for me, I just don't enjoy that. So if you ever see me step back, that's just why, because I don't actually enjoy being touched. And guess what? Somebody might forget. That might be the pushback. That might be the thing where you're like, they just didn't hear me. But it's on me to keep delivering that consistently. And this would be an example of me doing it. Do you know when we spoke about how lots of people like to be touched and I don't? I'm just reminding you that I don't, so I might just step back when you do that. And so on and so on. And again, I think that we have to make sure that our boundaries are affirmed to our differences and to do with who we are as a person, and make sure that they are beautifully aligned, because if we don't show up for ourselves, not everybody will know how to show up for us in the way that we actually need. And we ultimately, in how we show up for ourselves, teach people how to show up for us, and we teach people how to love us and how to care for us. I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know your thoughts. Let me know some boundaries that maybe you're struggling with, and I'll try to give you some level of support or input if you're having any difficulties. But yeah, speak to you soon.